Welcome to our next lecture on Mora Nevuchim. We on the guide for the Perplexed. We are in part 3, chapter 51. That's 5-1. We are on page 624 of the Shlomo Pinas edition. That's the one that I'll be reading from, and any page references are referring to that edition. And we are in the middle of a very interesting discussion of some of what Rambam mentioned was the secrets, the secrets of the Torah, which are different than what sometimes people mean when they talk about the secrets. But we're about to start today. Remember, this paragraph started where he talked about the different types of people in the world, and he gave his parable of the palace, the people that are not even anywhere close to the city, people that are trying to get in, the people that live within the city, the people that have their backs on the palace, the people that walked into the palace, and the people that actually get into the antechamber. And he compared that to people who are not completely those who are seeking to know the knowledge of God, and those who are completely not interested. We discussed that, last week, and we discussed also how we have to take the time when we have the opportunity to pursue that knowledge, so that it can imbue our entire lives, even when we're not involved in necessarily holy or esoteric or godly pursuits, or pursuits of philosophical or scientific attainment of knowledge. We still have to, but if we spend the time when we do have that opportunity, that it imbues our entire life with that. These are some of the issues that we talked about until now. But the Rambam now is about to discuss a topic which we discussed at length in part 3, chapter 23, and back in 17. We talked a lot about the issue of providence. Providence is usually understood as basically God's how much does or doesn't God intervene in this world in response to our behavior, right? So a extreme view of total providence would teach that every single thing that happens in this world is something that God is intimately involved in, and it's all deep and intimately calculated, and so on. The opposite of that, which Rambam back in, I think it was chapter 23, mentioned, the Epicurean view would be the view that providence, God made assuming for even that there was a creator, God made the world, it runs on the laws of nature, everything is happenstance, God is not involved at all. And then there's views all kinds of places in between there. And Rambam discussed it at length, and here he's about to discuss it again. And in many ways, what he's about to talk about is somewhat contradictory to some of the ideas that he expressed when he talked about providence before. But let me just mention really quick one of the things that he did mention before, and that is the idea that the extent to which God's providence has effect over our lives is the extent to which we attach ourselves to God. All right, and that is, intellectually, philosophically, spiritually. The more we tap into that overflow, right, the divine overflow with which God governs and runs and powers this world, is the extent to which we are governed by God's providence. And the extent to which we are distant from that, and we ignore that and are not tapped into that overflow, is the extent to which we are not governed by providence, and we're just governed by the happenstance of what occurs on this world. That is an idea that Rambam established before. We talked about it at length in previous lectures, and of course, you're welcome to go back to them. But over here, Rambam is going to go farther into this topic. And I am going to tell you right now that if you don't fully understand exactly what he means, like what is he really trying to say, you're in very good company, because scholars from the times of the days of Rambam himself have been debating what Rambam meant. And I'm going to tell you, I'll tell you a little bit as we go through this about a letter that Shmuel ibn Tibbon was the translator of the Moreh Nevuchim. He translated the Moreh Nevuchim from Judeo-Arabic into Hebrew in the Rambam's lifetime, and he corresponded back and forth with Rambam. And we have some of these letters, asking what did you mean here, what did you mean there, And in one very, very important letter, Shmuel ibn Tibbon asks Rambam, what in the world did you mean when you said this, what we're about to learn, right? And unfortunately, we do not have Rambam's answer to his query. So from that day on, in other words, from within Rambam's own lifetime until today, scholars still debate what Rambam means. I am going to tell you a lot of the different approaches, and then I'm going to tell you what I think, for what it's worth, if that's going to be helpful, and you guys will decide what you think. But either way, let's do it. So I'm starting from on page 624, the second paragraph. It's near the bottom. A most extraordinary speculation has occurred to me, right? So Rambam is saying this flash. Remember, if you remember all the way back in the beginning, Rambam says that as we delve into the divine sciences and to sciences in general, right? Rambam divides both, considers both equally important, right? You have these flashes of wisdom that just come, that just you just realize it, you catch it, you get it, right? The moment. So this is what Rambam is talking about now himself. A most extraordinary speculation has occurred to me just now, through which doubts may be dispelled and divine secrets revealed. All right, that's going to get everybody's attention. All right, so let's hear these divine secrets. We have already explained in the chapters concerning providence that providence watches over everyone endowed with intellect proportionately to the measure of his intellect. Now, what Rambam means here is not the measure of your IQ, of how smart you're able to be, or what your mental capacity is. He's talking about how you use that intellect to tap into, what he had called before the divine overflows, the wisdom which flows from the upper realms into this world, which enters our own minds. The closer we tap into that wisdom and understand it and internalize it and make it a part of our consciousness and our psyche, right, to that extent is God's providence over us. I already told you that, Rambam says. Thus, providence always watches over an individual endowed with perfect apprehension. If you have perfect apprehension, meaning you completely are totally in control over your awareness of everything, right? To the extent that that's possible. Rambam has told us that only one person in history has ever achieved that, and that was Moshe Rabbeinu, right? Moses, right? But to the extent that the closer you can get to that perfect apprehension, providence is always watching over that person whose intellect never ceases from being occupied with God. Such a person is in constant attachment through his intellect with the knowledge of God. On the other hand, an individual endowed with perfect apprehension, but you may have a person who has achieved this level at a point, right? But whose thought sometimes for a certain time is emptied of God. I'm at the top of 625 now. He is watched over providence only during the time when he thinks of God, right? Providence withdraws from him during the time when he is occupied with something else. A person may have achieved that level, but may not always be at that level. There are various things that may occur in his or her life that takes him away from that attachment, that incredible intellectual level that he's on, right? So during that time, providence withdraws from him during the time when he is occupied with something else. However, its withdrawal then is not like its withdrawal from those who have never had intellectual cognition. He's still at a different level than the person who's never gotten there, a person who's never contemplated the truths of God, a person who's, they're at the moment, they're both not thinking about God, right? I need to have a simple term, so I'm going to say thinking about God, but you have to try to think of it in Maimonidean terms, right? But there's still a difference between the guy who like Moshe Rabbeinu or one of the other prophets who has achieved that level, but now he has to do something mundane. He has to, whatever it happens to be, he might not have that attachment at this moment, versus another guy who's never ever been there, right? There's still a big difference between the two of them. But in his case, that providence merely decreases. So he still has providence. With the other guy, he's gone, right? He's never been there, right? He has no providence. The same judgment, the providence that God has over animals, God has over him, right? But the person who has achieved it, there's still providence, but it's decreased because that man of perfect apprehension has, while being occupied, no intellect in actu. In other words, at this moment, his soul, that's a term that Rambam doesn't use. He's used the term intellect, and I'm going to use the term soul anyway, even though some Maimonideans might be upset with me. But his soul is just not attached to God at that moment, right? But that perfect man is at such times only apprehending potentially. He still has the potential. He can. We know he can get there because he's been there, right? Though close to actuality. So he's close to bringing it. It's not happening at the moment, but he could make it happen at any moment, right? At such times, he is like a skillful scribe at the time when he is not writing, right? There's still a difference. A person who has the skill of being a scribe is still different from a guy who doesn't have that skill. Even if at this moment he might not be writing anything, right? He's still a scribe. The guy who doesn't know how to write, he's not a scribe at all, right? There's still a difference between the two of them, even if they're not writing at that moment. On the other hand, he who has no intellectual cognition at all of God is like one who is in darkness and has never seen light. Just as we have explained with regard to its dictum, the wicked shall be put to silence in darkness. He who apprehends and advances with his whole being towards the object of his apprehension, right, is like one who is in the pure light of the sun, right? Someone who understands it, and he's like he's in the light of the sun. He who has had apprehension but is occupied is, while he is occupied in the state, like one who has a cloudy day in which the sun does not shine because of the clouds that separate it and him. Hence it seems to me that all prophets or excellent and perfect men, whom one of the evils of this world befell, right? When something bad happens to that person, had this evil happened to them during such a time of distraction, the greatness of the calamity being proportionate to the duration of the period of distraction, or to the vileness of the matter with which he was occupied. So he's saying that when does something bad happen to a person who's good, right? And this is a very powerful and very controversial, and we can argue on this statement easily, but we'll try to bring some objections to him and see what he's really trying to say. And that is that to the extent that a person is separated from God is the extent to which a calamity, something bad, can happen to him. And hold that thought for a second. If this is so, the great doubt that induced the philosophers to deny that divine providence watches over all human individuals and to assert equality between them, the great doubt, which is the doubt of theodicy. How could it be, if there's a God, right, and if God has providence and he cares and he controls what's happening, why is it that a good person can suffer, right? That's the big question, right? So and the philosophers said, well, if the fact is we know that a good person can suffer, right? So it must be that there is no special providence for a good person, right? God, everyone is subject to the same vagaries of chance, no matter how good or bad you might be and morally, right? Individuals of other kinds of animals is dispelled. They think that there's no such thing as providence at all. For their proof for this opinion was the fact that excellent and good men experienced great misfortunes. So the Rambam is saying, I have an answer to this big question. Thus, the secret with regard to this has been explained even according to the requirements of their opinions. I'm explaining to you how this works. Because the providence of God may be exalted is constantly watching over those who have obtained this overflow, which is permitted to everyone who makes efforts with a view to obtaining it. We can all access this overflow of divine essence that comes down to us. We can all do it, right? If a man's thought is free from distraction, if he apprehends and may be exalted in the right way and rejoices in what he apprehends, and he's deriving this joy and love that comes from this apprehension of God, that individual can never be afflicted with evil of any kind. This is an extremely strong statement, right? So the Rambam is saying, if a person is completely and totally and absolutely and utterly attached to God, you are protected from evil. Nothing bad can happen to you. I know I can see everyone's brains are like churning like 1,000,000 miles an hour now, but that's good. They keep that way. And let's keep reading this, because we're going to discuss this, I promise. Right? For he is with God and God is with him. Nothing can happen to him. He's protected. When, however, he abandons him, but when you as a person abandon that attachment to God, may be exalted, and is thus separated from God and God separated from him, he becomes, in consequence of this, a target for every evil that may happen to befall him. that's when things can happen. And that's why even a person who's good can sometimes suffer evil, because it's a cloudy day. The separation is there. And why is there a separation? It's always the person's own fault for allowing that separation to happen. Remember, he just told us before that if we use our time properly, even when we're doing mundane things, we can maintain that connection. Right? For the thing that necessarily brings about providence and deliverance from the sea of chance consists in that intellectual overflow. What is it that keeps you from the deliverance from the sea of chance, right? What is it that keeps you protected? What's that providence? It is contained in that divine overflow that we can attach ourselves to. Yet an impediment may prevent for some its reaching the excellent and good man in question. Sometimes you can have an excellent and good man, but when there's a block, right, when there's an obstacle, right, and that he's not tapped into that divine overflow, right, then there's an impediment, right? He's not hooked in, he's not plugged in, right? Or again, it was not obtained at all by such and such imperfect and wicked man, right? And therefore the chance occurrences that befell them happened. That's why even a good man, or certainly a person who has never had that attachment, can have evil happen to them. To my mind, this belief is also shown as true by a text of the Torah. He may be exalted said, I will hide my face from them, and they shall be devoured, and many evils and troubles shall come upon them, so that they will say in that day, are not these evils come upon us because our God is not among us? It is clear that we are the cause of this hiding of the face. What is it? Why is it that God hides his face from us, so to speak, hides behind these clouds and allows things to happen, and does not, through his providence, make sure that nothing bad befalls us? It is because of our sins, right? It is clear that we are the cause of this hiding the face. That's what I just read. This is the meaning of his saying, and I will surely hide my face in that day for all the evil which they have wrought, because of actions, our own actions. There is no doubt that what is true of one is true of a community. This is true for a person, and it's true for the community, for all of us as people of Israel. Thus it has become clear to you that the reason for a human individual's being abandoned to chance, so that he is permitted to be devoured like the beasts, is his being separated from God. If, however, his God is within him, no evil at all will befall him. For he may be exalted, says, fear thou not, for I am with thee. Be not dismayed, for I am thy God, and so on. He says, when thou passest through the waters, I will be with thee, and through the rivers, they shall not overflow thee, and so on. The determination that when thou passest through the waters, and I will be with thee, the rivers shall not overflow thee, is accounted for by the fact that everyone who has rendered himself so worthy that the intellect in question overflows towards him has providence attached to him, while all evils are prevented from befalling him. It says, the Lord is for me, I will not fear. What can man do unto me? And it says, acquaint now thyself with him and be at peace, meaning to say, turn toward him and you will be safe from all ill. I want to go on. I promise we're going to stop and have some serious discussion of what he's saying here, but just try to absorb everything that he's saying, and I want to continue. So this is from Psalms. I want to pull up Tehillim 91. Give me 1 second. Because I want to read it in the Hebrew. You'll be more, some of you, at least myself, will be more familiar with that way. Just give me a minute. Okay, so consider the songs of the mishaps, which is Chazal call it that, right? You will find that it describes this great providence and the safeguard and the protection from all bodily ills, both the general ones and those that concern one individual rather than another. So what Rambam here is really saying is this is something that, Rambam has been extremely rationalistic until now. All of a sudden, it's not sounding so rationalistic anymore, right? It's sounding like some of the non-rationalists, right? If you're fully davuk, you can almost hear a Kabbalist speaking here. If you're completely attached to God, nothing bad can happen to you. If there's a problem, it's because there's a separation between you and God, right? All this rationalism we've been studying for years together, it's just fell apart in this last page. But it's powerful, and the Rambam is now using this to explain all of those parts of the Torah, and he's going to bring the most powerful ones. But we all know many parts of the Torah where it says, if we follow God's ways, right, that God will make sure no evil will happen to us. It's written all over the place, right? But he's picking some of the most powerful expressions, And he gave us examples before, and he's about to bring one of the most powerful expressions from Sefer Tehillim. So that neither those that are consequent upon the nature of being, nor those that are due to the plotting of man would occur. Nothing would happen. It says, right? And let me read it in the Hebrew from verse 3 to verse 6. Okay. Be'evraso yasech lach. I'm sorry, I skipped one. Let me start from 3. Kihu yatzilcha mipach yakush midever havos. God will save you from the bird traps, from the destructive plagues. Be'evraso yasech lach. Right? He will cover you with his pinions. V'tachas kenafav techseh, and he will cover you with his wings. Tzina v'sochera mito. Right? The fidelity and closeness to God is like an encircling shield. Lo siro mi pachad laila, do not be afraid from the fear of the nighttime, of darkness. Mechetzio of yamam, do not be afraid of the arrows that fly during the day. Midever ba'ofel yahaloch, do not be afraid of the plague that stalks in the darkness. Miketav yoshud tzorayim, for the scourge that ravages in the daytime. Yipol mitzidcha elef, thousands will fall from your side. Right? Many of you might remember this, right? Yeshivas Elyon. We say this in the liturgy many times, and it's something people often say when they're in trouble and they want protection from God. And this verse in Psalms gives us a lot of strength to know that God is protecting us, right? He then goes on to describe the protection against the plotting of men, saying, if you should happen to pass on your way a widely extended field of battle, even if 1,000 were killed to your left and 10,000 to your right, no evil at all would befall you. Do you not perceive and see, I'm up at the top of page 627, with your eye, God's judgment and retribution directed against the wicked that are killed while you are safe? These are its words: 1,000 may fall at thy side and 10,000 at thy right hand. It shall not come nigh thee. Right? Only with thine eyes shalt thou behold and see the recompense of the wicked. This is followed by what is said about divine safeguard. Then it gives the reason for this great protection, saying, what's the reason? That the reason for this great providence being effective with regard to the individual question is this, right? This is, I'm going to read verse 14 now in Hebrew, because many of us, including myself, just that's how it resonates a little more. Kivi choshakva falateu, right? Because God desires me, right? Va'afalateu, right? Asagaveu ki yodashimi. I will keep him safe because he knows my name. I'm sorry. This is God saying, right? Because this person is devoted to me. His desire is me. Therefore, I will save him. In other words, me, the person saying this to him. Asagaveu, I will keep him safe ki yodashimi, because he knows my name. In other words, if you know God's name, you'll be safe. Say, Yikra'eni ve'eneu. He will call out to me and I will answer him. Imo anochi v'tzara. I am together with him in his suffering. Achalatzeu v'achabadeu. I will rescue him and I will honor him. Orach yomim aspieu v'areu bishuasi. Right? I will let him live long, ripe days. Right? And I will show him my Yeshua, my salvation. So this is the Tehillim, which has given many of us strength in times of trouble. Right? And Rambam is saying we have already explained in preceding chapters that the meaning of knowledge of the name, what does it mean when it says that he knows me? It is apprehension of him. Rambam, of course, interprets that in Rambam's classic way of full, real, true knowledge of God. It is as if the psalm said that this individual is protected because he has known me and then passionately loved me. And as we've repeated many times, from knowledge comes love. And that's Rambam's theme throughout the Morah, throughout the guide, and throughout the Mishnah Torah, that it's through knowledge of Torah, knowledge of nature, knowledge, period, is what brings about love. Right? You know the difference between the terms one who loves and one who loves passionately. It uses kivi choshak. Lachashok is more than just love. Love, it's like a passion. It's an excess of love, right? So that no thought remains that is directed toward a thing other than the beloved. That's passionate love. That's choshak, which is apparently similar to a similar Arabic word. The philosophers have already explained, right? That I'm going to keep reading because there's a lot to talk about here, but I'm going to keep going till the end of this chapter and then we'll discuss it. If we don't have time to go to the next chapter tonight, so be it. This is a very powerful one. The philosophers have already explained that the bodily faculties impede in youth the attainment of most of the moral virtues. When we're young, we're strong, we're running after things, we're trying to establish ourselves in our career, we're running after looking for a mate, we're running after whatever. There's all this power and all this physical bodily faculties and all the more of that pure thought. It impedes our ability to really have pure thought. Now remember, Rambam wrote the Torah closer to the end of his life, right? After, I mean, he was still working very hard, but after he worked his whole life to become the Rambam, right? So here he's writing the Torah at a time when he feels himself like he's achieved this, this intellectual perfection that he's so passionate about, right? Which is achieved through the perfection of the intelligibles that lead to passionate love of him may be exalted. And all of this knowledge, this intellectual and emotional work that we do brings us to this love of God. For it is impossible that it should be achieved while the bodily humors are in effervescence. He's basically talking about when we're running after our pleasures, we're running after the things we want, right? We can't fully concentrate and focus on knowledge of God and thus coming to true love of God. Yet in the measure in which the faculties of the body are weakened and the fire of the desires is quenched as we get older, and it's really meaningful that Rambam's saying that as he's closing this book, where he's conveying his thought to us, right? His magnum opus, his main work, where he teaches us the way he thinks, the way he feels, the way he thinks we should worship God, right? He's telling us, as it comes to an end, right? This is where my heart, this is where my soul, this is where my mind goes, right? The intellect is strengthened, its lights achieve a wider extension, its apprehension is purified, and it rejoices in what it apprehends. When we finally, we say, I'm quit. I'm not running after being the richest guy on the block anymore. I don't need the Maserati anymore. I don't need the prettiest wife that I was looking for when I was 21 anymore. I don't need the to be the top guy in the shul and sit in the front. I don't need the $1 million in the stock market. Now I'm satisfied with, this is where I am. All I need, all I want is my relationship with God. Right? When I reach that point, when you get there, the result is that when a perfect man is stricken with years and approaches death, this apprehension increases very powerfully. It gets so strong in you. You recognize that love for God is so strong. Joy over this apprehension and a great love for the object of apprehension becomes stronger. And that love for God becomes so strong, right? Until the soul is separated from the body, until it comes to a point where your soul just leaves and it goes to God, right? At that moment, in this state of pleasure, right? It's this tremendous moment of pleasure and love where we just join with God. Because of this, the sages have indicated, and this is what it means when it says, according to Rambam, that Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam, those three great leaders, right, were the three that died b'neshika, with a kiss from God. And he's going to describe what the kiss. Well, I'm kind of giving you a preview of what we're about to read in 5 seconds, right? And that is that the three of them died by kiss. I just turned to 628. That intense love that Moshe and Aaron and Miriam culminated in their souls rejoining and joining the source of that love, the object of that love, which is God. They said the dictum of scripture, Moses, the servant of the Lord, died in the land of Moab by the mouth of the Lord, indicates that he died by a kiss. Similarly, is it said of Aaron, by the mouth of the Lord. And they said of Miriam, in the same way, she also died by a kiss. But with regard to her, it is not said by the mouth of the Lord, because she was a woman, and the use of the figurative expression was not suitable with regard to her. But the idea is the same. Well, that concept, the thing that happened with Miriam, her level of attachment to God was the same. It was expressed in a more modest way, though. The purpose was to indicate that the three of them died in the pleasure of this apprehension due to the intensity of passionate love. In this dictum, the sages, may their memory be blessed, followed the generally accepted poetical way of expression that calls the apprehension that is achieved in the state of intense and passionate love for him, may be exalted, a kiss, right? That intense and passionate love that one has for his lover, for the person. But here it's translated on a much higher degree, and that is that level of intense attachment to God, that kiss, that intense emotional love, that is the moment when the person's soul goes back to God, right? Let him kiss me with the Neshkeum and Neshikos Piu. That's from Shir Hashirim, the Song of Songs. The sages, may their memory be blessed, mention the occurrence of this kind of death, which in true reality is salvation from death. This kind of death is actually not really death. It's actually the opposite of death, Rambam says. It's being saved from death. And what Rambam really here is most interpreters understand him to be saying is his real understanding of what does it mean that there's tchiyat hamesim, that there's life after death, right? The Rambam is saying here, what is the negation of death? What is the life after death? It's when that intellectual apprehension, what we have in our hearts and in our souls, right? When it rejoins God in this intense, passionate moment of love, right? Mention the occurrence of this kind of, which in true reality is salvation, only with regard to Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam, but the highest level only happened with those three. The other prophets and excellent men are beneath this degree, but it holds good for all of them that the apprehension of their intellects becomes stronger at the separation. They also had a similar event at their death. It might not have been as high, it might not have been as intense or as pure, but it was the same basic idea, right? After having reached this condition of enduring permanence, that intellect remains in one and the same state, the impediment that sometimes screened him off having been removed, right? Now, at that moment of death, there's no more blockages, no more cloudy days, right? And he will remain permanently in that state of intense pleasure, which does not belong to the genus of bodily pleasures. That pleasure remains forever, for all time. This is Rambam's concept of the world to come, right? When that moment of pleasure culminates in something that lasts forever and has nothing to do with the body anymore, right? As we have explained in our compilations and as others have explained before us. Bring your soul to understand this chapter and direct your efforts to the multiplying of those times in which you are with God. Remember to focus with the moments that you have that you're with God, the moments that you're not running to work, the moments that you're not running to the store to buy the things that you need, the moments that you're not arguing with whoever it is that you're arguing with, the moments that you're not involved in whatever mundane matters you have to be involved in. Make sure you spend those times with God or endeavoring to approach him and finding times to set aside to do that, right? And to decreasing those times in which you are with other than he, and stop wasting your time when you don't have to, right? Wasting your time doing things that are not important and in which you make no efforts to approach him. Stop making times when you don't make those efforts. This guidance is sufficient in view of the purpose of this treatise. This is enough, really, for this entire book if you just know this. Now, there's a lot in here. I want to focus on the issue that he did say very clearly, right, that a person, when he is fully attached to God, is protected from all evil, and evil can only befall that person when he is somewhat separated from God. Without trying to lead you guys on too much, I want to know from you, like, how does that sound to you? How does that sound in contrast to some of the things we've heard from the Rambam until now? I want to hear what people say, because there's a lot of scholarly discussion and debate, both in traditional scholarship and in the philosophical world, of what the Rambam really means, what did he not mean. So I just want to hear from you guys what you have to say first. So I'm going to open the floor.
Well, if I could jump in, it's out of character. It sounds like a mystical approach to God, not a rational approach. And
Okay. So that's the first thing that people jump on, and it's not consistent really with what he wrote. And if you go back to our previous discussions of providence that were much more rationalistic, right? It just doesn't sound right, right? So that's the big question, and that's actually the main question that Shmuel ibn Tibbon, the main translator of Rambam in Rambam's day, posed to the Rambam, and I'll tell you what his approaches were. But go ahead, Yosef. I see what you have a hand up. Go ahead.
Just wondering, the liturgy that we have now for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, it says V'ala Medinot Bo Yamer, and I believe that was based on what the Rambam wrote in Hilchot Deot, which is that For the Jewish people, there's divine providence for individuals, and for the other nations, it's a more general perspective, meaning that it's the country or the city or the county or the province or whatever it is, as opposed to the individual Jewish. Is my understanding correct?
It might be to some extent, but I don't think it's true that the Rambam would have said that the differentiation necessarily goes between Jewish and non-Jewish people. I think he would have said that, but well, he would have said as follows, that, and he did say it. In fact, we're going to see at the end of the last chapter, it seems Rambam seems to indicate that any person, right, who accesses intellectually God can achieve this level of providence, whether they're Jewish or not. Being Jewish gives us the advantage of having the wisdom of the Torah, right? So it gives us the advantage of making it easier for us to get there, right? But in here, there's nothing inherently different about a Jew's ability to attain this intellectual attachment and love of God that a non-Jew couldn't do also. And but it is true that you'll find it more often among Jews, simply because we have access to this body of wisdom that others don't, right? But anyone can, right? So to some degree it's true, but not because it has to be that way. There's nothing necessarily inherent about a non-Jew that says you can't do it. It's just that
Thank you for
does that make sense?
Yeah,
But
I said thank you
yeah,
for
yeah.
Yeah, this is the first time I've really sat down and taken notes, because I sort of felt the importance of what this is to
Okay,
me.
go ahead.
And so basically the way I look at it is that he's saying that perfect apprehension or intellectual comprehension, occurs if you understand the science and nature, understand nature and science and the things that those things teach you, and also the things that he outlined in Torah, how to understand what is really being said in Torah. You understand that. That's really parallel to understanding nature, understanding science. And by doing by understanding these things, this scientific and nature understanding is what creates the divine overflow. I mean, think about that.
It's not so much what creates the divine overflow. That's how we
How you comprehend. That's how you get into the divine overflow.
yes. It's better.
That's what I mean.
Right.
So
And you just said, when you said science and nature and Torah, that's according to Rambam, that's what he calls the Maaseh Merkava and the Maaseh Bereshit, right?
Yeah.
Maaseh Merkava meaning okay, go ahead. Keep going.
So by doing all of that, you really reduce your chance of having bad events because of your understanding of all of these things, and you follow those principles. And if you do that and understand about why good diet is important, why avoiding germs is important, these things that God created that you understand, and you understand the science of things, and you understand why when an earthquake happens, you don't want to be on the coast, because you understand what creates a tsunami. So you have less of a chance of having a bad event occur to you if this happens.
Okay.
These are things that, as I see it, what he's sort of saying about what God really does. You don't have to. Providence means that you attain providence by better understanding of these things. And if you accept the fact that God is not coming down and intervening with every little thing that happens with you, and the way you're protected from battles and all of those things is by understanding your ability to protect yourself. And battle may be a metaphor for protecting yourself from all bad things that happen. I mean, you can look at it as a metaphor. Thousands of people to the left and right are dying of COVID. You understand what COVID is. You do wear a mask. You get the vaccine. You do those things that better protect you, and you take Paxlovid. And then you survive COVID, whereas those other people, these other schleppers, are on the ventilator and they're dying and having all this stuff happen. So, that's why these bad events happen, and that's why you don't. And God is protecting you by giving you understanding. Okay. Now, if you move on to the next step of saying, okay, getting close to God, And what you're doing is saying, okay, I'm looking at all these things. God has done this for me. I'm older now. I understand it. I'm going to keep looking at these things and following these things and reading more and understanding more of Torah and understanding more of science and understanding what nature is doing and what nature does to people. And by continuing to do this, I'm much closer to God. And actually, it's almost a spiritual thing at that point. I'm really so close to God that I'm really at the point where the knowledge of this comes to love. It's knowledge coming to love from all of these things that are occurring. So I can tie this together. I don't think it's totally, two separate events. I think he's sort of leading to that and saying, this is how you get there. And so if you follow those things I said all the way along, you finally reach the point where you have love and passion for God. And then you reach the point at the end of your life where you're really able to be next to God. And,
Well,
and that's sort of the way I summarize. Now, I mean, you could argue with a lot of that, but that's sort of what I see. Tell me what I'm missing.
No, I do. I'm gonna, after I hear what everyone wants to contribute, I'm gonna give us a summary of the different scholarly understandings of the Rambam. And so far, you guys are like, each one of you has been hitting the nail on the head. So Jeffrey was pointed out the big contradiction, the seeming contradiction. This sounds so mystical, right? Which is the question that the scholars ask. You are giving an approach which many understand as the answer, right? And Yosef was tapping into the really more of the Torah aspect, right? The aspect when you were talking more about the science aspect, he was talking more about the Torah aspect, and I'll explain that a little more, but I want to hear what other people have to say before I feed it into you. But I'm really happy with the feedback we're getting so far. So let's keep going. Is there anyone else that wants to contribute their thoughts, questions, objections, anything? If there isn't, I'm gonna give you. I'll tell you the way it's said. So I kind of I've been reading this for I can't tell you how many years. So I don't even know how many years anymore. But and if anyone wants, I could send you all selections of articles, mostly from various philosophers that specialize in Jewish philosophy in various universities around the world, because they all debate what Rambam really means. You can also read the introduction of Shlomo Pinis, right? In the first thing, he has a whole chapter on this subject, and that's a very well quoted one. And he was known, the one who translated the version of the guide that I'm using. He was a student of Leo Strauss, who was a professor at the University of Chicago. And Leo Strauss, I could send you some of Leo Strauss's own articles on the subject if people want. Just send me your email addresses later, and I could send these to you. But basically, I'm going to summarize them all. So the starting point is the big question, right? And that's the question that Jeffrey mentioned. And that's the question that Shmuel ibn Tibbon posed to the Rambam. And very interestingly, Shmuel ibn Tibbon, in his letter to the Rambam, and this letter we have, you can read it. It outlines like his various possible things. Do you mean this, or do you mean this, or do you mean that, right? And he goes through, and I mean, it's too much to go through the whole thing, right? But he tries to understand, like, how does this work? Like, is this so one approach, right, is to say that at the end the Rambam just dove into the mystical world, right? One approach is to say, and if you were a mystically inclined Jew, right, you would skip the whole book, read this last chapter, and say, bam, the Rambam agrees to us, right? And trust me, there are many that do that, okay? So many of the more mystically inclined Jews will tell you, yeah, the Rambam wrote all blah, 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 blah. But look at what he wrote in chapter 51, right? Because he agrees with us, right? Ultimately, and how does it work? It works because basically God, it's like miracles, right? And not overt miracles like splitting the sea, but God intervenes in your life. If you're a tzaddik, if you're righteous, he will protect you, right? And if you're not, he won't. And that's the way it is. And it's all dependent on your whether you're a good person or not. And that is certainly an interpretation of what the Rambam says, right? I'm not taking away the possibility of interpreting it that way. The other Another way of understanding this is that some people try to say is that if you were to become this person who is so attached, so emotionally and intellectually attached to God, you become almost like a disembodied intellect. Like your physicality almost means nothing. And if all you are is an intellect and you're so involved in what's going on in your mind and in your soul and in your heart, whatever term you want to use for that intellect, right? Right? Then physical suffering means nothing to you. You don't even experience it, right? Because you're attached to God, right? It's almost like if you imagine a monk who can, who's so attached that he can walk over fire and he doesn't feel burnt. He doesn't feel pain because he's just so attached to the spiritual, to the divine. That's another way of understanding it, right? Moshe ibn Tibbon, who is the son of Shmuel ibn Tibbon, who doesn't reference Rambam's answer. So it's very possible that Shmuel ibn Tibbon's letter reached Rambam, but he died before he had a chance to answer it, right? So it's possible that we don't have Rambam's answer because he just never actually answered it, right? But he understood it in a different way. He said, well, first of all, remember in this time, in the 11th, 12th century, astrology was considered a science, right? It was assumed that the stars do run many things about our lives. And, so he understood the Rambam is saying that if you're so intellectually attached to God, then you understand all the astrological science and you know how to avoid, getting hit, which is touching on, if you look at astrology and you don't laugh at it, right, you assume for a moment that it's a science. It's approaching a little bit of what Jack just said. But then there's another way of understanding it, right? Which is many scholars, especially in the early and mid 20th century, felt that the Rambam, what he's really saying is that sure, bad things happen to you, right? But if you're emotionally, intellectually attached to God, right, and that is the overarching reality to you, then you can withstand all those evils. Then those evils don't mean as much to you, right? It's almost like we pointed out when I mentioned a couple months back, the books by The Choice by Edith Eger, and the Holocaust and Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl's book. I mentioned those books, and I was saying, within the most horrific suffering, they were still able to survive because they lived within their own mind. They were able to take control over their choices, right? Yes, suffering happened. No one would ever say they didn't suffer. They suffered worse than we can even imagine. That's another approach. But there's an approach that's put forward by many thinkers, and it's very clearly written out by a philosopher. The name is Stephen Nadler. He teaches philosophy and he specializes in medieval Jewish philosophy, I think at University of Wisconsin. And what he wrote is he's not the only one. I'm just mentioning him because he really writes this out really nicely and clearly. And again, if you want, I'll send you his article. But he basically understands it as follows, right? Because everyone is wondering this, this seems to contradict with the rationalism of the Rambam. How does this fit? So he explains it as follows, right? First of all, he starts with almost exact, Jack, you said it like I couldn't say it any better, right? If you know and you have that knowledge, right? If you really had full and total knowledge of science and Torah, right? So you really understand how the world works. You understand how people work, how God works, how nature works, right? Then your ability to avoid catastrophe is significantly enhanced, right? Right? I mean, imagine 50 years ago, our ability to predict the weather was, yeah, it's okay. You can kind of sort of predict maybe it might rain tomorrow. But now it's much, much better than that, right? I mean, we still make fun of the weather people for, getting it wrong. But the truth is, if you look at it, we're statistically pretty darn good. When they tell you it's going to rain tomorrow, it probably will, right? So the more knowledge we gain, the more, so if you know that you're living in a flood zone, you can get out, right? Because you can listen to the weather, right? So the more, but if you had perfect knowledge, right? right? If you really, really understood everything you possibly need to know, right, or everything that can possibly be known about weather patterns, then you will know exactly how much rain there's going to be tomorrow and when, and how to avoid getting flooded, right? So that's on one level, right? But that kind of only answers like really part of the question, because we know, right, that no matter how much knowledge you have, there is a point, right, at which we don't have control, right? Right? You and I could know just about everything, but there is still a point where the guy next to you can decide to just give you a punch in the nose, right? And there's really nothing you can do about it. You can make every psychological assessment of the likelihood of getting punched in the nose tomorrow. But if the guy behind you is an idiot and had a bad day and had a fight with his wife the night before and decides to take it out on you, right? He can do it, right? So on that level is where, so Nadler takes it a step farther and says that on that level, however, if you truly have this kind of relationship with God, then even there you still have control, and that is control over your own choice, how you react, right, to that kind of thing, right? How you react inside, right? So a person that is truly has full knowledge of God and a full, total, unobstructed, pure relationship with God can, number one, avoid most tragedies, and number two, when tragedies do happen to him or her, he or she knows the choices that you can make internally, right, to not react in a negative way and maintain that love of God and stay there. So it's like a kind of a combination of both. So these are just some of the approaches that scholars use to try to understand this Rambam. Now, I happen to like his, and that's really the approach that I really think is the most consistent with everything we've learned until now. So it doesn't take away any of Rambam's rationalism, right? It's still in many ways it's spiritual, but it's not spiritual in an unrationalistic way. If we truly know and understand and love God and understand our purpose, then we will also know how to react when things happen to us that aren't that don't seem fair and don't seem right.
So there's one other point I wanted to make, and that is that when something bad happens, in spite of everything that you've planned and done, and you followed the rules and you've done everything that you possibly can to understand these things, Torah and science and nature, but the experience of having to handle stress through your life gives you a better ability to handle things as things come up, just because you've had the experience of that and you've utilized these tools to help you handle it, and you get better and better as you get older. The other thing, that all relates to the fact that the earlier you start understanding these things, you're better able to handle the first stress, and the next one's easier, and the next one's easier. So as you go on, you really attach closer to God, even with things that happen. You don't get upset with God. You don't get upset with the way things are. I just want to relate to that. I think that's something that I think there's a sub title under this that he sort of hints at, sort of that the more you know, the better you're going to be able to do.
Yeah. No, and I don't want to no, this is really good. And I just I mean, one thing that's very clear, and that's something that we can all take away and go home with and think about, and that is that our ultimate job, according to Rambam, is to develop and this knowledge of God, and knowledge of God that we achieve through a search for truth, a search for what's real, a search through science, a search through nature, a search through understanding what the Torah is really trying to teach us, right? And rational, and it takes time, it takes work, and the more we know, the more we achieve these flashes of knowledge, the more we love the source of that truth, which is God, and the more we attain real happiness, and the more ultimately we do avoid suffering, whether that's actual physical suffering because we have the knowledge to keep away from those things, or whether it's internal suffering because we have the strength and stamina and love for God that enables us to get past the various disasters that can, will, and do happen to all of us, and Yes, go ahead, Leslie.
Well, I was just going to ask, what about the people who say, and Jews, who say, well, that happened to you because it was a punishment, and God's punishing you, and that's why an evil thing or a bad thing happened to you. What would Rambam say to that?
He doesn't, bad things happen because you're separated from God, That's what he just said. It's not like he doesn't really look at the Rambam did emphatically declare to us when we learned his on providence that the result of being bad is at least usually suffering, right? And the result of being good is at least usually good, right? So if we lead the life according to the Torah, and if we lead a good life as a society, then things will be better for the society, right? So in other words, if we're all honest, if we're all good, if we all treat each other with compassion, if we're all charitable, then the chances of somebody dying of hunger and somebody having an illness that would not have enough money to pay the doctor is a lot less, right? If we lead a life of dishonesty and cheating and lying, then the chances that somebody's going to suffer in their lives is much, much higher, right? But he doesn't look at it in such an overly simplistic way. He doesn't accept that we do something bad and then God gives you a smack in the face, or you do something good and he gives you a candy. That's not how he looks at it. Those things happen, but they happen because nature happens, right? There's hurricanes, and somebody's house is going to get knocked down in a hurricane, and it just happens. It didn't happen because that person, ate non-kosher last night. It happened because there was a hurricane, Now, the Rama would say, well, if you were smart and intelligent, you would have been careful. You would have boarded up your windows because they predicted a hurricane. You would have evacuated because the weatherman told you, or you would have built a better house, and or something like, right? But he doesn't look at it. He never looks at it in such a simplistic way, and frankly, by the way, if somebody, it's okay for you or I to tell myself I suffered because of something I did wrong. If somebody ever tells you or ever tells someone else that you suffered because you did something wrong, then you should excuse me. That person don't listen to that guy. He shouldn't be your friend anymore, because that's just a frankly very not nice thing to tell someone. But I don't, it's okay if I tell myself that, but if I tell you that I don't think you'd be coming to this class very often. Yeah. So yeah, we're and also I don't want to go without re-emphasizing his really beautiful understanding of death, of death through love, and it's just an incredible way of understanding what it means, at least of understanding how Rambam understood what life after death is about, right? And what death is about when we live life properly, right? And it's really beautiful, and something for us to think about. I don't want to let that go, and it's not coincidental that it's near the end of the book. I mean, he deliberately put it here because he wants us to know where we're all going. We just have a couple, I think, 3 chapters left, maybe 5-6 pages, so we're really coming to the end here. But every single one of these chapters is a gem, and yeah, if anyone wants some of those articles, just let me know in the email and I'll send them to you. Okay.
Do we have any accounts of his last days, his very last days, what he died from?
I don't know. I really don't know. We're not 100% sure exactly where he's buried. He might be buried in Israel, where they say he's buried. It's possible. It's not completely, but it's not 100% clear. Yeah, I don't know. It might be known, but for some reason I just don't know.
All the work they did, and working and teaching and writing for so many years.
Just from utter exhaustion. And I think his death was probably much more like what he just described with Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam's. But
yeah. Moshe Lokam Ke Moshe is what they say about him, right? So
yep. I think that's an appropriate statement. Okay, so we'll see Billy Netter. We'll see everybody next week as we approach the end. And looking forward to starting Kuzari with everyone. And we'll enjoy your night. Thanks for joining.
Thank you so.
Thank
Thank
you.
Best.
Thank you so.